Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are continuing on with the life of Abraham and getting to one of the most famous passages of Abraham, too, with the almost sacrifice of his son Isaac. Now, before I start, I do want to point out something. I have used the word infamous a couple times. Uh, I'm thinking that was just another way of saying famous. Totally not. So I do apologize about that. I meant to say famous, basically. Anyways, that was pointed out to me online, so just wanted to make sure I made that clear. So with that though, turn with me in Genesis chapter 22. We're going to be looking at the full chapter today. And here we see a couple things. Obviously, the test of Abraham, but we also see a moment that points towards the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And I think that's really interesting to see in this Old Testament passage. And obviously, this isn't just about Abraham, it's about Isaac too, right? Very much so. But this is a huge moment in the life of Abraham. So, with that, Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. So, the word tested here is not tortured, it is not forced. It is simply that, a test. Obviously, we have seen good moments in the life of Abraham. Genesis 12, 15, 17. We've seen good moments. But we've also seen some moments not so great, right? Whether it be the end of chapter 12 with Pharaoh, with the trick of masquerading who Sarah was, doing that again with Abimelech, the just kind of stupid decision to go along with Hagar and the birth of Ishmael. So you just there's a little bit of both, and so you wonder if this is a test to see, okay, where are you at, Abraham? Now that you have the son of promise, and Ishmael and Hagar are gone, um, where's your faith at? Are you now putting all of your stock in the fact that you have the son of promise, that you are no longer putting your stock in the Lord and your faith in the Lord? So I think this is a big test, and what is asked is even more of a test, of course, right? Verse 2. God said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So you have this mystery about the location, just like in chapter 12, but even more than that, you have this monumental request. And you can see the weight of this. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. I mean, you can see that the Lord understands how big of a ask this is. And there's multiple layers to this, of course. I mean, obviously, you have the sacrifice of Isaac. That's not a good thing. Like, so that would be detrimental. That would be very just yeah, it would be very bad. But then you have, on top of that, then you have the situation where, again, Abraham is promised to be the father of many nations. But if he goes through with this, then he has no son again. He has no children again. Hagar and Ishmael are gone. They're gone. Uh, Now, indirectly, he still has the connection with Ishmael, but Ishmael was never the son of promise. It was Isaac, and so this is a very big moment. But then, of course, at the last one, I think at least, what would you say to Sarah? I mean, seriously, what would Abraham even say to his wife? I mean, at this point, Isaac is not a newborn. So, my guess, Abraham's in the 110 to 115 range, making Sarah in the 100 to 105 range, years old wise. And so, this is a very big test and a very big moment for the faith and life of Abraham. So, with that, how does Abraham respond? Well, he actually doesn't say anything. He responds with action. Verse 3. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. So Abraham doesn't say anything. There is no back and forth dialogue with the Lord and Abraham like there was with the possibility of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. If you remember that, oh, well, what if there are so many righteous people? Well, what about this many, about this many, about this many? There is none of that here. There's no response from Abraham words-wise. He just gets up the next morning, gets everything ready, and goes. Now, he does take 2 men with him. I think this is a witness, per se, of the fact that he is taking this trip. But they don't actually partake in the witness of what is about to happen. Verse 5. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. So these young men are not supposed to be the witness of the sacrifice, but just of the trip itself. Obviously, Abraham's up there in age, so they're, I'm sure, helping too, right, with the labor of getting all this material to this place. But I love this verse because you see in verse 5 the faith of Abraham. He says, I and the boy, or young man, will go over there and worship and come again to you. Abraham believes and trusts that Isaac is going to come back. Now, obviously, another word to say coming back from the dead is resurrection. So you start to see the little pointers to Jesus, right? But it goes even more a step from there. Verse 6, and Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. Isaac said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. Clear question, right? Obvious question from Isaac. Look, we've got all this stuff, but what about the thing that we had to sacrifice? And Abraham doesn't blatantly tell him straight up what's going on. Instead, he just says, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. Obviously, this is a foreshadow, but this is another faith moment that Abraham believes that there will be a lamb that's involved, or as we see later, a ram, but that there will be an actual animal to be sacrificed instead of Isaac. But I think too, there's this really big connection with Jesus. Instead of lamb being the animal, God will provide for himself the Lamb of God for an offering. Obviously not burnt offering because it was on the cross, but an offering nonetheless, to appease the wrath of God, to cover sin, and to defeat death. And God provided his son for you and I. What a beautiful statement that is. Not just in the life of Abraham and in this moment, but what it's pointing towards, which is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But they both so Isaac and Abraham, they take off with the equipment needed. They leave the men behind, and they go up the mountain. And so, what happens? what will happen next. Most likely, you probably have heard this passage, but in case you haven't, this may be new to you. So, with that, verse 9. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. And that verb slaughter, it's not this and he just like to poke his son with a knife. No, it is to end his life. And Abraham's about ready to do this. But he has this moment where he could turn back, or he could go somewhere else, but he goes exactly where God tells him to go, and he almost does this. But thankfully, there's an intervention. Verse 11. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. Now, before we get into the angel's response, this was never going to actually happen. In my thinking, this was never actually going to happen. Either Abraham was going to fold and not do any of this, or God was going to intervene, which he does. One, because he shows later on in the books of the law in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then in later bits too with Joshua and First Samuel, he shows that the killing of children, the sacrificing of children, especially to the pagan god. I think it's Molech, or is it Moloch? I think it's Moloch, but is an abomination. And so you never really sense that the Lord is going to actually let Abraham through this, which then makes you wonder, what is the point? Well, the angel kind of gives you a little bit into that. Verse 12. The angel said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Now, again, it's not like God's surprised by this. He's like, whoa, guys, he's going through with this. It's not like, whoa, I didn't know he would actually go through with it, guys. Like, it's not like that at all, right? I think what it is, wow, he actually does value. He values my words. He trusts and believes in what I say. Again, not that God's surprised by that, but it's just this moment of Abraham is this man of faith that we have seen, even though there are moments where he falls and does some dumb things. He is still a very faithful and godly man. And this just shows that, because he is willing to put the one thing that he has been striving for and hoping for and desiring for, a son, he is willing to throw that all away to trust and obey the Lord. And what a beautiful moment this is. Even though it's still very traumatic. Don't get me wrong, if I was Isaac, I'd be like, what the heck is going on? But what a beautiful moment this is. And so, verse 13, Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide, or the Lord will see, as it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided, or on the mount of the Lord he will be seen. So you have this really interesting just moment that, wait, hold on, don't do this, but the promise that Abraham made to Isaac in verse 8 about God providing him for himself the lamb for a burnt offering comes true. And it's a ram that is caught in a thicket by his horns. But I think what's really interesting is the phrase, instead of his son. So it's showing you the substitutionary atonement that we see with the death of Christ later on, and we're already seeing this in Genesis 22. So I think that's really, really important to see with this passage. And then finally, to end this section here, verse 15, and the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. So this is pretty fascinating when it comes to the Lord just saying, look, yeah, you have been faithful and you have obeyed my voice. Even though this could have meant the death of your son, you went forward with it because you trust and obey me to see things through. And what a beautiful moment this is. And he comes back to his men once again, fulfilling the promise in verse 5 that I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. Just what a great moment this is. There is a little bit more at the end here in verse 20. Now, after these things, it was told to Abraham, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uzza's firstborn, Buz's his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, or Kesed, probably, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Reumah, bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah. And you may be thinking, okay, what's the point of that? Well, the point of that is it's setting up the wedding of Isaac to Rebekah. So it's showing that this promised line that is talked about by the Lord in verses 17 and verses 17 and 18 will continue on because he is setting up the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah with that little parenthetical there. And verse 23, Bethuel fathered Rebekah. So with this, that ends one of the most famous passages of the life of Abraham, which not only is huge in the life of Abraham, but points to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But from here, next week, we're going to go into kind of the twilight of Abraham's life, and we're going to start with the death of his wife, Sarah. So with that, I will see you next week. Thanks for spending time with me today to see one of the most famous passages of the life of Abraham. And I'll see you next week. Thanks.